Hey, it's Ron again. I hope that you're having a great day. Today we're going to look at Revelation chapter 11. And last time we looked at chapter 10. In chapter 10, in the first half of chapter 11, John takes a break from the trumpet judgments to tell us some important things. So we have a few more important things to look at before we get back to the trumpet judgments in verse 14, I think it is. But in chapter 11, verse 1, it says this. Then I was given a measuring rod like a staff, and I was told, "Rise and measure the temple of God, and the altar and those who worship there. But do not measure the court outside the temple. Leave that out, for it is given over to the nations, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months." And what he's doing here is telling us that the holy city is going to be trampled for 42 months. And the holy city is Jerusalem during the tribulation period. So it's going to be overtaken by the Gentiles. And what's going to happen is in the 7-year tribulation period right before Jesus comes, it's going to be broken into the first half and the second half of each of 3.5 years. And what's going to happen in the middle of that, when you look at the book of Daniel, when you look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and another part of Revelation, that what's going to happen is right in the middle of the tribulation, the Antichrist, who's also called the man of lawlessness in Thessalonians, and Revelation he's called the beast. But it's the Antichrist, all the same person, different names. He is going to take his seat in the temple in Jerusalem and proclaim himself to be God. And then he's going to rule the earth through the rest of the tribulation. And so that's, this 42 months here is 3.5 years. So that's what he's talking about. That during one of those times, that Jerusalem's going to be overrun by the Gentiles and trampled. Now, when we look at everything in the Bible, and especially here in Revelation, the trampling of the Jerusalem seems to fit a lot better with the second 3.5 years. So what that would mean is the Antichrist takes his seat in the temple, proclaims himself to be God, demands that he be worshipped as God, and then rules. And that's the time when this happens. And then it also says in verse 3, "And I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth." So 1,260 days is just short of 3.5 years. And it's the way he words it here just flows right from the other 3.5 years of the trampling to this. So it seems to be saying at the same time. And that it just all fits. When you look at everything that's happening, it fits best that both of this 3.5 years and this 1,260 days, which is just short of that, they both mean the second half of the tribulation. And so during that time, God's going to send 2 witnesses, he calls them, to prophesy to the people on earth. And he says, and when he says here that the 2 olive trees and lampstands that stand before God, he's just telling us that these guys come from God and they're empowered by God, they're led by God. And so what they're going to do is they're going to prophesy for this time during the second half of tribulation. And this is really cool because even at the tribulation time when God's punishing people, he's going to send these 2 people to go out there and to share his truth and to preach for him. And he's just giving people more chance to come to him even through all this time of tribulation and judgment. So this is really cool that God's still reaching out to people in love even when they're so wicked. And then it goes on and says in verse 5, "If anyone would harm them, fire pours from their mouth and consumes their foes. If anyone would harm them, this is how he is doomed to be killed." So these 2 witnesses, if anybody tries to harm them, they will have the ability to shoot fire out of their mouth and destroy these people as protection. And then it says in verse 6, "They have the power to shut the sky, that no rain may fall during the days of their prophesying. And they have the power over the waters to turn them into blood, and to strike the earth with every kind of plague, as often as they desire." So here it says these 2 witnesses, they're going to have these miraculous powers. They'll be able to stop the rain. They'll be able to turn water into blood, to do, it says every kind of plague. And it's not that they're going to want to hurt people, but it's just, people deserve judgment. So whenever they think they're going to be given the ability to decide, it says here, as often as they desire. Whenever they think people need to be judged, they're going to be able to judge them with some kind of plague and, that kind of stuff. So these two people are going to be really powerful. Then it says in verse 7, "And when they have finished their testimony, the beast that rises from the bottomless pit will make war on them and conquer them and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city that symbolically is called Sodom and Egypt, where their Lord was crucified." These two witnesses, when their time is, when they've done all the prophesying, and again, God's going to use them to reach out to people and share His truth with them, give them a chance to repent. But when people have had enough time to do that, and God decides they've had enough, then He's going to let the beast or the Antichrist kill these two witnesses, and their dead bodies are going to lay there in the street, which is, it says, it's just symbolically called Sodom and Egypt. And Sodom and Egypt were known for having really wicked people. But then it says here where their Lord was crucified, which clearly shows that He's talking about Jerusalem. So at this time, in the future, during the tribulation, Jerusalem he's saying, by calling them Sodom and Egypt, he's saying that it's going to be filled with wicked people. And then in verse 9, "For 3.5 days, some from the peoples and tribes and languages and nations will gaze at their dead bodies and refuse to let them be placed in a tomb. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and make merry and exchange presents, because these two prophets had been a torment to those who dwell on the earth." So what's going to happen is when the beast kills these two people that have been preaching and giving out the judgments, everybody's going to start partying on earth, these people who have been rejecting them and God. Then it says in verse 11, "But after the 3.5 days, a breath of life from God entered them, and they stood up on their feet, and great fear fell on those who saw them." And then in verse 12, "Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, 'Come up here.' And they went up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies watched them." So after 3.5 days of being dead, these guys, God's going to bring these witnesses back to life, and this is going to terrify everybody, because they thought the beast had beaten these guys, and they didn't. They're back to life. And then they're going to be caught up into the clouds to be with God. And then it says here in verse 13, "And at that hour there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city fell. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven." So there will be a huge earthquake in Jerusalem, and it will kill 7,000 people. And then when it says here, "and the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven," if the rest means the rest of the people in the world, then it means that they will not repent of their sin, but just that they will acknowledge God as God. Because the book of Revelation makes it clear that most people in the world will continue to rebel against God until Jesus comes back. But if the rest means the rest of people in Jerusalem, then it can mean, when it says here that they gave glory to the God of heaven, that they actually will become Christians. But we just don't know. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for watching.